modern-day witch hunt. And just like all those trials back in Salem, where they had a bunch of witch trials but never brought a witch, the state today is intent on bringing a murder prosecution without one thing: the murderer. My name is Phil Corrigan, and along with my co-counsel, Breon Johnson, we represent Mr. Drath. Today you'll meet John Drath. And you'll learn that John Drath is a loving father. He's a businessman here in Lone Star. He owns an engineering firm, pretty successful one. And he loves his daughter more than anything in the world. So you'll hear that on May 13th, 2011, when he saw his teenage daughter with a man in the mall, he became upset about it. And when he saw messages, online messages on her computer, he also didn't feel good about that. He became physically ill. But what you won't hear is John Drath get up here and defend himself by telling you what happened after he saw those messages. Because he just doesn't know. The evidence will show that he completely blacked out at that point. The state got up here and told you a little bit about what they say will prove guilt here. But the state didn't tell you about some other things. The state didn't tell you that its lead investigator, a person named Dusty Stockard, is actually dating Mr. Drath's ex-wife. The state didn't tell you that Mr. Stockard, the state didn't tell you about what evidence Mr. Stockard actually collected on the scene, or who this investigator talked to. Today, you're not going to see any DNA evidence. You're not going to see any video evidence. You're not even going to see a murder weapon. Ladies and gentlemen, you're not going to hear about interviews with Mr. Walker's co-workers, his friends, people he may have disliked. You won't even hear about any interviews with Sally Drath herself. Because the evidence will show that this was nothing but an attempt to pin something on Mr. Drath that he just didn't do. Ladies and gentlemen, John Drath has entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity, because the evidence is going to show that in the mental state he was in, he couldn't even be found guilty of murder here in Lone Star. You're going to hear from a psychiatrist who works from the state, as they told you. Well, what the state didn't tell you about that psychiatrist is that she told Mr. Drath, there's never been a successful insanity plea in this state, and you won't be the first. The state also left out the other bases of her opinion. The state didn't tell you that she based part of her opinion on the pattern of gunshot wounds. You're not going to hear anything about an investigation into his shooting history. You're also going to hear from somebody named Dr. Chris Johnson. Dr. Johnson spoke with the defendant for over 10 hours. The evidence will show that that's 9.5 more hours than Dr. Ciccone talked with the defendant. And she, based on her conversations with John Drath, based on a battery of tests that she gave John Drath, and based on her observations of everything in the police file, is going to tell you that she concluded Mr. Drath has a mental disease or defect. Ladies and gentlemen, today you're not going to see evidence of a murderer. You're not going to see evidence of John Drath's guilt. All you're going to see today is evidence of a vengeful witch hunt aimed to hold a man responsible for something that he just didn't do. So at the end of this trial, my co-counsel is going to get up here and he's going to ask you to render the only verdict that makes any sense in this case. Not guilty.